The time is 6:27 p.m.
And welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sainsbury. So, Ian, here we are.
Yeah.
How was yours?
Yes, I have to apologise. I've got a touch of cricket voice this evening. So, yes, it was a long weekend. We were up in the Midlands playing a bit of blind cricket, the national T20 finals. Ball to hand, lamentably didn't win. Lashed the semi-final up, ended up coming third, having battered Lancashire in the fourth place playoff. And then a good time was had by all, and I've had the joys of a Sunday rail service back from Birmingham, which of course is interesting, because the only way to get home is to go via Bristol, which isn't entirely on the way. So yes, an eventful old week and weekend for me. How about yourself, as a shrewd political narrator and watcher? What's been tickling you this week?
Well, lots of people found out in a very public way whether they got to keep their jobs or not, and whether they were being promoted, demoted, sidestepped, or basically just flung out of the park entirely. There was that happening.
Yeah, that was quite a spectacle. Some, I think, expected. Poor old Gav Williamson was finally put out of his misery, and others which I would largely unexpected. I don't think our very own Penny Mordaunt fared too well from the latest reshuffle. So yeah, it was an interesting watch. Some of our local, well, not necessarily two locals, but Caroline Dinage over in Gosport has obviously upset somebody.
Well, yeah, ended up being replaced by Nadine Dorris, which is I don't know how to respond to that without sounding unkind, really. But it's well, we should see how much better culture and media fares with her at the helm. I don't think anyone was really surprised that Gavin Williamson was flicked into the long grass. Although I did see a rumor on Twitter, I don't know how true it is, that that he might appear in the New Year's honours. Which, unless that's an opportunity for Her Majesty to lop his head off, which I don't think is likely, then
can you get an award for services to bungling?
I don't know. Maybe if we have an algorithm for that, that's possible.
Could be. So, which segues us, well, not nicely, because good Lord, I was about to say that was a terrible segue. I was about to be unkind about tonight's show. So this evening we have a guest.
It would save other people the trouble. Yes, so we are to be joined this evening by Councillor Darren Sanders, who is the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness. So we've invited him onto the show to talk to us about what Portsmouth City Council are doing with regarding housing and helping those people that are fleeing the awful situation in Afghanistan. So literally running for their lives. What the city's doing to help them. So while we build up to the point where Darren enters the show, shall I briefly kind of try and sell some of the shows that we've got coming up, just to
get a heads up in terms of and it's timing's still to be finalised, but we're hoping to bring you in the next few weeks.
Yeah, so next week we're going to be talking. We're going to be asking whether the Portsmouth City Council purchase of the new Theatre Royal is effectively that level of support, or that mechanism of supporting local culture. Is that a good idea? What's the rationale behind that? So we've got Steve Pitt, who knows the ins and outs of the local theatre scene, to come on and talk to us about that. But we've got a headline guest that we've got coming up, but we've not confirmed the date just yet, and that would be the freshly minted new leader of the Portsmouth Conservative Group on Portsmouth City Council, which is none other than Simon Bosher.
Yeah, so we're gonna invite Simon on. In his in a sort of statement to the media when he took the role on, he made some very strong powerful statements about the vision for Portsmouth that Simon has. So we're going to invite him on to explore some of those aspirations and really just get his thoughts and overview on the local political scene.
Indeed. And so other than him, we'll also be at some point around the time that the decision's made, unless it's obviously delayed again. We are inviting back onto the show the campaigners from Let's Stop Aquin to talk to us about how their campaign's gone, and depending on the timing as to whether that's what they hope to see or what actually their response is to the outcome of that decision. So hopefully that will be isn't that nice, the campaign won, or it will be, oh, that's awful, what's next? Does this involve Gerald Vernon Jackson lying in front of a bulldozer at some point? So we'll see kind of what comes with that.
I've now got a vision of Gerald as Arthur Dent from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Indeed. Well, we can remind him to bring his towel.
Excellent.
And if any of our listeners haven't read any Douglas Adams, why not? So on top of that, we're also going to formulate a show where we'd like to invite on people from the political parties, whether that they be councillors or whether they actually be just members that have attended their party conferences. So we'll have people from each of the three main parties actually on to tell us about what the three most important things that happened at their conference that they'd like voters to know, because kind of a bit of a weird thing that probably normal people that aren't as heavily involved in politics don't necessarily kind of understand or go to, and they are, to be honest, full of exactly the types of people that you expect. So it'd be lovely to have a conversation with them.
And I think the other thing we've got is an appeal. So one of the things the shows we have been trying to pull together is really looking at the whole subject of shortages, Brexit or pandemic. So we have invited a number of local business representatives to come and join us. We haven't got as many responses as we might have hoped. So if you are somebody who is aware of or whose business has been affected by shortages, either of people, materials, labour, all of the above, and you'd like to come onto the show and give us your views and your thoughts in terms of what the root cause really is and where we should be going next, then you can contact us in all the usual ways. Yes. Can you not, Simon?
Indeed. And so if you'd like to contact us, either message us via Facebook or you can contact us on Twitter. So please, to make sure you get notifications of the show, follow us on Facebook, Pompey Politics Podcast. You can email us, pompeypoliticspodcast@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Twitter, Politics Podcast 1, and basically you can join us there. And this is our first show where we're actually trying a slightly new bit of technology service to enable us to simultaneously stream to YouTube, Periscope, so that's kind of Twitter, and Facebook. So that's kind of all a bit exciting stuff. But yeah, if you'd like to take part in any of those shows, or you've got suggestions of future shows, by all means, please do ping them our way. We'd love to hear from you. But also, please do subscribe to us wherever you listen to your podcasts and give us a review, especially if it's a nice one.
Yeah, give us 5 stars.
Yes,
yeah.
That would indeed be great. So let's so enough advertising ourselves. We're not the BBC. So we now have a Darren waiting in our waiting room. So let's welcome Darren onto the show. And we'll let him play with the buttons. We've got some questions lined up for Darren, but if you've got things that you and if we've got time to later on, then if there are some that we pick out from the comments, we might ask him those as well.
So Darren, welcome to the show.
Hello,
and good evening and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Frost. That was lovely. Thank you.
So it's been a while, Darren, since we've last had you on, and I guess if we look at framing this evening's show, and it's been pretty much headline news for I would guess probably last 2 or 3 weeks, where after 20 years of having a presence in Afghanistan, and again it's tied back to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. the Taliban what seemed very suddenly went from being a potential concern to the whole of Afghanistan falling like a pack of cards, really, and the Taliban now being the controlling government. Obviously, as a result of that, over 20 years, there are a great number of local Afghans who have worked with and supported the security forces, including the UK military. And, we've seen the scenes, very harrowing scenes at Kabul airport as that we looked to airlift out as many people as we possibly could in that very narrow window before the end of August. And I think since then, we've seen a lot of stories played out in local and national media. So we thought we'd get you along this evening to give us the inside story and perhaps the truth behind some of those headlines when it comes to Afghan refugees in Portsmouth. So welcome to the show.
That's fine, kind, Ian. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So we'll dive straight into the questions, Darren.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of direct impact on Portsmouth, can you share how many families from Afghanistan are being supported in Portsmouth?
I've been away for the last week, so you're going to have to forgive me. But the target is 9, and that will be 9 families, which the council is negotiating with the Ministry of Defence. These are 9 interpreter families. There are 2 schemes. One involves the interpreters that Ian was talking about and the people who've been employed by the armed forces Ian is talking about. And the other one is called Operation Warm Welcome, which is the 20,000 people over 4 years, which you may have read about in the papers and seen on the television. At the moment, nobody actually knows what that actually will do, and nobody knows what that will mean. But as far as the interpreters are concerned, we've taken 9 families so far.
Okay. And are they kind of in the pipeline? Are they already? Have they already been settled? Are they?
As of a week ago, we had 7 had already occurred. 2 were due to come in. We're told there are about 15,000 Afghan refugees in the country. Several are being put up in many have been put up in hotels, including some in Hampshire. It's not clear how many of them have been employed by our armed forces and how many of them have been evacuated in the somewhat Vietnam-like scenes that Ian mentioned earlier on, of being evacuated from Kabul airport. That's not clear at the moment, but we've agreed with the MOD to take 9 families, 9 interpreter families.
And I guess, Darren, one of the questions that always pops up around, as with any discussion around asylum and refugees, is that there is a well-publicised shortage of social housing, and I think it's something we've discussed before on the podcast. So I guess questions that people might be asking is, well, how have we managed to find these properties in terms of with such a well-publicised shortage of social housing as it stands?
Well, it's really odd. I mean, I was asked that question this afternoon, unbelievably, in a pub in Baffins, when I was at a friend's birthday party, and a local resident nobbled me to ask exactly that question. We haven't. They're being housed in Ministry of Defence properties. The MOD have various places across the city. Some are off the island, some are on the island. And so they're being housed in those properties. They're not being housed in council housing.
So there is an element of, in terms of, just to be clear, the duty of care to provide the actual bricks and mortar housing isn't falling to the council. That's being done in partnership with the MOD?
Yeah, I mean, this is for the interpreter scheme. As I've said, the 20,000 people scheme, nobody really knows. So we would love to see what's going on with that. But as far as the interpreters are concerned, which is the bit we do know about, essentially the MOD is providing a building, and they're providing the first year's funding. So they're providing the first year's support, the first year's rent and everything else. All the councils who are involved have said, well, hang on here. What happens when we get to the second year? Does this mean we're going to have to cough up? For precisely the reasons behind the question you asked. And those discussions are going on between all councils involved in the MOD at the moment, but it's MOD buildings.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, that kind of speaking to the, as you say, the kind of the what's behind that sort of question. I think to some people's kind of concern would be that effectively that we know that we've got a waiting list for people with requirement. We know there's a massive shortage of social housing in the city. We know we can see that there are still sadly people rough sleeping in the city. So perhaps just to provide a bit of context around that kind of story, can you tell us what's being done to help what's being done to address those issues of social housing and to help the people rough sleeping in the city?
They're definitely not rough people. I can vouch for that. Yeah, I mean, it's split into three things. So the context is, you're right, Simon and Ian. Many people believe the city's full. Many people believe that we shouldn't build a home ever again, because we shouldn't, because we're too full. Sometimes that changes when their daughters or their sons can't find a home. But there are many people who believe that. That's not true, but there are problems, and there are definitely pressures. So the first thing to do is to build social housing. That's the first thing. When we took over in 2018, there was no plan to generate social housing. We've created one. We've built temporary accommodation at Southsea, the old Southsea Community Centre down in Somerstown. We're in the process of putting together, we're just about to finish work on a place called Doyle Avenue in Hilsea. We're doing work in Polsgrove. We're doing work in Drayton as well. And we're also doing work in properties we own in Havant. But we know that you can't build your way out of this crisis in Portsmouth. I mean, that's why we believe the government's 17,700 housing targets are mad, frankly, because they're imposing something that this city theoretically can't cope with. So you can't just build your way out of the crisis. You've got to find another way of doing it. And that's why we're buying back council houses which were bought under the right to buy. And the circumstance of that varies. Some people can't afford the bills. Some people want to move on. Some people's circumstances have changed. But we've secured funding to buy back at least 500 council homes by March 2024. We are well ahead of schedule on that. We've bought back over 150, and the last figures I saw had more than 100 in the pipeline. That's equivalent to building 500 council homes, and is, I understand, the biggest program of its type in the country. But it's important, particularly in a city like Portsmouth, because there is that pressure. But that's for people primarily on our waiting list and people we have a legal duty to house. One of the most bizarre things about the stuff I do is that we have no legal duty to house rough sleepers at all. That is bonkers. We have a moral duty, but we have no legal duty. And so the people we accommodate under the schemes which we're now doing are called in government jargon non-priority homeless, which seems to me to be a bit nuts. But that's what they're called. They're not rough sleepers. So what we've done is we've used money that's been given to us by the government under various schemes, including money that was given to deal with COVID. So in April 2020, housing rough sleepers became a priority of the council. And that has given us the money to get rough sleepers off the streets and into hotels initially, and now into what's described as safe and secure accommodation. There's about 200 rooms of those. The ones that people may have read about, are former student blocks in Southsea, on Elm Grove, and at the old registry office opposite the United Services Portsmouth ground. But also we've worked with private landlords to put rough sleepers who maybe have less complex needs, but they maybe just need some financial help and those sorts of things, into private rented accommodation. And in that, those two things together have helped cut rough sleeping in the city significantly. We believe we want to end it, but we believe unless you dragoon people at gunpoint into accommodation when they don't want to go, there will still sadly be people who will sleep on the streets. And that's for a whole raft of reasons. And that's why we're continuing to offer support to them, just in case they want to go into the accommodation. So it's a three-pronged approach. There's a fourth prong, which is around preventing homelessness in the first place, which is around making the predominantly private rented sector easier and safer. But those are the three things we've enacted so far. Sorry, that's a long answer.
No, that's
No,
all right. It needed the detail. I think, and I know this it's the thought that strikes me every time we've discussed it with you, is that just providing a isn't it's not as simple as that. There are for some people there will be complex reasons why they haven't got their own accommodation, or why they feel they're not able to accept the in a position to be able to accept the offers that are there, for a variety of reasons that and I guess there isn't a one size fits all answer to all of that, so it deserves a decent answer. So thanks, Darren.
No, and I think the approach to rough sleeping we did from 2018 was to move away from treating people as some sort of amorphous blob. That, you can either sweep off the streets, which some people believe, or you can all save, which other people believe, and actually treating them as individuals, and actually as humans with slightly different approaches and slightly different needs. And that's where the support that's provided is tailored towards them. It's not saying you're homeless, therefore you must have X, Y, and Z. That doesn't work. If you've been in Hellman for 18 months or 2 years, as one guy I ran into in Commercial Road had been, Boots doorway is better than Hellman. You'll need a different approach to someone who says come from another part of the country, having fled an abusive relationship. That you can't have a one size fits all policy. And that's what we're encouraging to do, not have that one size fits all policy.
And I guess the question there, Darren, would be, we saw there was a step change with the Everybody In program at the start of COVID. But I guess some of our listeners, I'm sure, will be interested to know, how much of that has slipped away, with there's lots of positivity around us potentially being over the worst of COVID. Has that had a bearing on the number of people who have perhaps been in for some period of time and now find themselves back on the streets?
Well, you say things have slipped away. Since the Everybody In approach, which was a government-inspired scheme driven by the then rough sleeping czar Louise Casey, that policy was you've got to keep everybody in regardless. So some things have changed. So if you have, say, for instance, you've come in from the European Union and you can't find benefits and you're sleeping on the streets, the government is telling you to go up.
Yep.
Basically, go back where you come from. That was not the case in the Everybody In approach. And we've talked to quite right-wing conservative authorities in other parts of the country who've gone, well, we have a problem here. We can't do this. And it's very interesting when you actually meet those real problems that we face. So that's one change. 2, we've been able to exercise a bit more control. So if people have been behaving in a way that is bad for the people around them, we've now got more freedom to kick them out.
Yep.
And that's a difficult choice, but it's either that or making sure everyone else is okay. And that has contributed a bit to some of the people you see on the streets. We believe that's the right thing to do. And that's why we continue to give them help and support, rather than necessarily say cast them out into the outer darkness, because that's madness. So yeah, some things have changed, but the whole Everybody In approach essentially got us to deliver what we were wanting to deliver with money. And that's a real difference. Portsmouth has had one of the biggest amounts of money in the country for sleeping rough, because the government likes the way they do things. They like the fact that we have data and we have evidence, which shocks me about everyone else. They like the fact that we've got a cross-party, multi-agency, independently chaired working group, which is overseeing the work around rough sleeping, and that's been a huge boost. And they like the fact that we've got a plan, and that's massively helpful. And I think the key thing now, I think, for government is to give us the money to prevent people being homeless in the first place. Because if we're not very careful, we'll have all this money and we'll be back here in 5 years. And that's a waste of time.
Absolutely. So if we bring it back to the question about Afghan families, PCC has been widely reported as taking the largest share of families in Hampshire. First of all, is this true? And why are other authorities perhaps not stepping up to the same level?
It was actually the southeast. which was the report. It wasn't just Hampshire.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was true. And it was because we were taking more Afghan interpreter families, because, as I said, the 20,000 family plan is still not there. So 9 was greater than any other individual authority in the southeast. So it was related to the interpreter families, and it was true at the time. But since then, other authorities have actually found properties. We in Portsmouth are helping other councils try and find properties and actually try and find ways to house other councils, because we believe that everybody should take their share. This is a national situation. This is very, very different to anything else. These people, as you rightly pointed out, Ian, are here because of a government decision to pull out of Afghanistan. And therefore, we owe it to those people to make sure they live as good a life as possible. Many of the rules around them have changed. They have indefinite leave to remain. They're treated like British citizens in terms of actually having a legal duty to be housed. And that's very different to anything else we've seen. So we owe it to them. 9 remained at that time the biggest figure that we had, but other councils have been stepping up, and we've been very clear other councils should step up because we can't do everything.
No, absolutely.
Okay, so what would so I think we've kind of touched on it a bit there. So I guess some of the concerns that you may well encounter, and you might tell us some stories of your interactions with members of the public. But so if you met so like the chap that you were talking about, you met an ex-service person that has been on the waiting list for several years, that feels that these people are, and I'm quoting someone, are leapfrogging them. What would you say to someone in that situation, or that makes that?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I have a virtually situation this afternoon. I would say to them, one, they're not going into council accommodation; they're going into Ministry of Defence accommodation. So if you're worried purely about, I'm not going to get my council house, and these people are coming on over and getting our council houses, that's not right. The second thing is that, again, these are people. I mean, several people in this city have been in Afghanistan. They know. They've been in other theatres. They know. That if they've been in Iraq, they know. That the only way you can actually try and create a stable country is to have local people working with you. If you've been in Afghanistan, you know how the Taliban work and are working now. That's why you saw the horrific sight of people clinging to planes and then falling off in the sky above Kabul, because they knew how it was going to work and they knew how they work. We owe a duty to these people. These people have been helping our soldiers for decades in some cases, and we owe a duty to them to make their lives right, just as they put their lives on the line in Afghanistan to try and stop the Taliban from coming back and enacting their murderous regimes. That's what I would say. I think we owe a duty to them.
I guess if I play devil's advocate to that, though, Darren, is that, if I'm that ex-service person that have done my tours of duty in Helmand Province, and have spent my time and have lost colleagues to IEDs and those stories that we get back, I guess there is I think there could be a certain sting in the fact that we've found empty MOD properties that we're now going to make available for these people. And you're absolutely right. I don't think anybody disputes the duty of care. I think the real moral maze question is to the gentleman you spoke to in Commercial Road, that's somebody who served their country on the front line, and we don't seem to have been able to find an MOD property for him or her.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, for him, as I said, sleeping in a shop doorway was better than Helmand. Because I asked him, would he go into the accommodation? He said no. But this was like 2-3 years ago. I understand that, and I think depending on where they're living at the moment, and some may be living in MOD properties, say up in Hillsea, or down by the Hayling Ferry, for instance. but we're doing a whole range of things to try and get people off the waiting list. A target of 500, effectively 500 new council homes that bought back by March 2024, building new properties, stopping people from becoming homeless as well, trying to speed up the amount of time, cut the amount of time properties are empty so people don't have to hang around for so long. All those sorts of things we're doing as well, because we know there's a problem. I mean, if we were just saying, oh, we're going to take them all and do nothing else, then I think everybody has a right to go, well, you don't know what you're doing. But we're doing a whole raft of other things too. But interestingly, as I said, for this group of people now have an indefinite leave to remain. The government are treating them like British citizens in terms of council's housing duties. So if people don't like that, please write to your MPs and complain. Personally, I think we owe a duty to them as well.
Yep.
But I think it's the government has changed the rules. So they're exempt from the bedroom tax, for instance, which, you know, many other people in the city would love to be. So things have really changed for them in terms of the duties that we owe to them. I think there's wider issues about whether we should have pulled out or not, and whether we should have followed Donald Trump's failed policies, as far as I can see in that. But that's a whole different ballgame. We as local authorities of all political parties are now left holding several babies.
And I think that's a very valid point. And you know, we can the history of Afghanistan. If you don't have to study it very hard to know that every foreign power that has sought to intervene in Afghan politics, in Afghan regimes, has left after a shorter or longer period of time without success. So it's, you know, it's a fascinating lesson in history that, you know, I'm not sure, you know, famous sort of management thinking is start with the end in mind. I'm not sure how we ever expected, you know, Afghanistan to work in the way that we would want it to work. So it comes as no surprise. I think the surprise really has been the speed with which the Afghan administration collapsed. You know, and again, there was the well-publicized, well, did you phone the foreign minister on Friday? Well, I didn't do it on Friday, and by the time it got to Saturday, he had already left the country. So I think those are the things that have contributed to the speed with which things have had to change. And just picking up on one of the statistics there, you know, 500 new council properties, you know, for me, it's a very impressive number. You know, again, when you think about 500 dwellings and what that would mean if you had to build them, I guess in terms of to help with my understanding, the scale of the council waiting list, I've got no strong sense as to whether it's hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands.
Okay, so the council waiting list is around about 2,300. It's gone down a bit over the last few months, but it's been pretty static. And I think there are various ways that we can deal with it. Now, many of these people are currently living in council properties. They just want to move to as they see it, better ones. So it's not as if these are people who are always on the streets. They want to move to better ones, but many we do have a legal duty to house, and they deserve a permanent home because they've left for a whole raft of reasons. Most people leave because they've been kicked out by their private landlord, frankly, mainly because they're behind with their rent, or because the landlord wants to buy the property back, or he wants to sell it. He or she wants to sell it. Many private landlords fall into it by accident. They're landed with the property and they don't know how to deal with it. So you've got a really complex situation, which can mean that people may wind up homeless. And so they wind up at the council civic offices going, can I have a place? And that's why I think we need to change that. It's also around trying to get private developers to build more affordable housing in the city. A development in my own ward at Kingston Prison was passed as 267 private dwellings, thanks to a deal with the government. Excuse me. 167 of those are now affordable. So it's about trying to increase the supply where you can, but also trying to deal with what you've got and stop it happening in the first place. Those are sort of the three pillars on which we're working.
So, for me then, potentially if you could deal with 20% of the waiting list as is over that next 3 years, then that sounds like a very positive step forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think so, but I may be mildly biased.
Yes, I guess you're probably coming at it from a different perspective.
Well, I think the one of the joys about one of the joys is that actually most of the time, most of the politicos in the city actually agree on the basics of how to get things done. They just disagree on how to get there. So I think one of the things of cutting the waiting list, I think, is something that cuts across everybody. It's just how you get there.
And I guess looking at it on a very practical level, we've touched on the where the bricks and mortars and the roof over the head is going to come from. We've spoken about, is the city full? I guess a lot of the concerns are not just around once you've housed somebody, that's great. What about local amenities like doctor's surgeries and school places? And, I'm guessing that a number of these people have been through very traumatic experiences and will need potentially, areas of support and well-being. Is that part of the equation being left to the Portsmouth Council to sort out, or are you getting central support with some of those challenges?
As far as the Afghan interpreter families, that's all being supplied by the MOD and by the government, certainly for the first year. So that includes offers for things like school transport, school places, healthcare, and other forms of support too. So it's a really different approach to what some people on the left may think a Conservative government would do. But that to me is very, very welcome. As I said, we owe a duty to these people. As far as rough sleepers are concerned, as I said, there's a tailored package of support, which has been funded by the government, but is being produced by us. And that, again, it revolves around different people having different needs. So some will need help with money. Some will need help with often complex mental health issues. Some will need access to a GP. I mean, we managed to get many of people on the streets and in the homes jabbed over the last few months, which has been very good. So individuals need help. And although that support is overwhelmingly funded by government, it's being provided by Portsmouth in a tailored way, because we know people want to get back on their feet. For me, for people who are sleeping rough, I want to see those people in jobs. I see in other parts of the country, I mean, in London, the Mayor of London is doing a fantastic program in terms of providing people training. When actually I want to see them in jobs. And that's one of the things I've tasked various people to do. I hope we can make some progress on that soon.
And it looks like, for whatever reason, I think we touched in the intro to the show that we will pick up a shortages episode later on. But it I saw some figures earlier in the week that I think there are well over 1 million unfilled vacancies at the moment. So in terms of, and often those being sort of entry level positions. So it does feel like there may be a window of opportunity to tie those things together.
Yes, I mean, we certainly can't fill 1 million vacancies. And I think the notions, I mean, I was on a train to London on Friday, and it was half an hour late because the train crew wasn't there. They didn't have enough train drivers. We're not having enough lorry drivers. The people behind Burnham Matthews are saying Christmas is going to be cancelled because there's not enough carbon dioxide in order to help. I mean, people like me would say a lot that's around problems of leaving the European Union and not having a plan to actually train up British people to do those jobs and to encourage British people to do those jobs because we knew they were coming. Others will go, well, it's a global, those people who believe differently to me will go, well, it's a global shortage. And, everywhere's got it. So, you should expect it. But it's a problem we have to live with. And the more you're right, Ian, the more we can actually bridge that gap, the better.
Yeah, because I guess when you're at that point of full employment, when it becomes, to use that phrase, if I quote the great Billy Bragg, it's a buyer's market. Then it does make the challenge of people perhaps, who've experienced homelessness and some more challenges in their life to find employment.
Oh yeah, and absolutely right. And I know from speaking to people who, for instance, wanted to leave the European Union in the referendum, they believe that actually leaving would force up the wages that employers would pay, and that would mean they would feel better able to take on board those jobs. Now we're going to have to see how that works. But that I think is a whole different onion of kettles, as a friend of mine once said.
It would indeed. A mutual acquaintance of ours quite often says that's a different kettle of onions. So how have you obviously out and about a lot and interacting with members of the public? You're speaking to the great and the good of Portsmouth. So how have Portsmouth residents responded to this situation?
I think people are broadly sympathetic, certainly to the interpreters. They are very, very understanding of the situation we've put them in. They like the fact we've got a plan. They are worried. I mean, some of the questions you've asked are questions that they ask. But broadly, they're happy. We've had offers of people who want to provide rooms. We've had offers of people who want to provide money. We've had offers of people who want to provide food, which is all absolutely fantastic. And so we're working with the Hive in Portsmouth to actually try and help that. We wait to see what the plan is for the 20,000. But because at the moment it ain't looking like 20,000 over 4 years, it's looking like 20,000 over 4 months. So wait to see what plans emerge for government from that and whether that changes anything. But at the moment, certainly with the interpreters, people are broadly happy. They do have some concerns, but they're broadly understanding of the situation that we're in, and that's great. I can't vouch for the great and the good. I don't talk to those people.
Which is it's marvelous. So, and again, you touched on the 20,000, and it may be an unknown, but I guess one of we saw the airlifts, we saw the people who got out, and obviously there are a significant number of people who are left behind in Afghanistan, and their potential journey to the UK will be potentially quite perilous and difficult. But I think to that point around the phasing, I like you, I share the concern that if you're in Afghanistan now, I don't think you're going to be wanting to wait until year 4 before you come out of Afghanistan to take up your place in the UK, and that's liable to be very heavily front end loaded. So where's your next piece of information or insight coming from what impact that might have in Portsmouth?
Well, it's going to have to come from the Home Office, frankly. I mean, the Home Office is overseeing that bit of the programme. That's being led by the Safeguarding Minister, a lady called Victoria Atkins, at the Home Office. But I want to see what more details. We want to see what more details are. We don't know, for instance, whether each council is going to be told you've got to take 50, come in ready or not. We don't know if it's going to be a case of, well, do you have any room? And I think some authorities may have more room than others. It's not clear what level of support will occur, whether the level of support being provided to interpreters will continue, whether they'll have the same legal status as the interpreters, we don't know. All these questions need to be asked before we can provide answers. But what we want to see is to make sure every single council does its bit. We in Portsmouth are doing our bit for people who have served this country in a difficult set of circumstances, and we want to see other authorities do their bit too.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to. Sorry, Simon. Go.
That's all right. We touched on there a little bit about. I guess it's kind of unimaginable to the rest of us to think of, the situations that that you talked about how trying to help the people that are out already, that have been able to actually be airlifted out, but there are still probably sadly many thousands of people that are effectively trapped, desperate in Afghanistan, that that don't have any means of being able to get a visa or being able to to arrange a flight, and I don't know how to even begin to start to imagine how desperate a situation that is, how frightening a situation that is, especially when you kind of see the news reported on the last couple of days about the Taliban basically ceasing education for girls at school age, and renaming was it their equalities, or their ministry for women as the Ministry for Virtue and Vice, which was a part of their organization before, that basically went around beating or attacking women that were seen to be doing things that they considered immodest, or against their fanatical interpretations of religious law. So especially when you consider that a lot of the people that would have been brought up in the last 20 years of what's been created, which is a mildly westernized society where there's education and opportunity for women, where there's where they have actually possibilities, whereas now to effectively for them to be forced to be under house arrest, and for their education and their prospects and their opportunities to be curtailed. Is it naive to think that those people in that desperate sort of situation are going to be rocking up to the airport with a passport in hand and the correct paperwork, and they're going to be fleeing for their lives, aren't they, trying to leave the country in any way they possibly can, and that's not going to be through the normal routes. And I just wonder how long before those desperate people then actually make their way to a country of safety, and if they've got connections in the UK, or they they might have actually previously been told that they've got a place to be able to come to the UK. How long before they start being the people in boats that Priti Patel is trying to turn away to France?
You put it about as well as I would, actually, and I think that's a real issue, because they're going to come on those boats. They are, and we're going to turn them back, because that's what's being worked through between the British Home Office and the French team in Calais. And then what? And turning migrants back in boats is very, very popular with people. They fully get that, and they fully believe that's what a country should do. But if they're fleeing this sort of level of persecution, then the questions become sort of the questions you've been saying this evening, which is, okay, well, should we take them? It's a country of which we know little, would be a view, particularly some of them are isolationist elements.
Yeah, I think what the government have announced, with the existing people that they've brought over, about effectively treating them as British citizens, giving them the right to remain, that's absolutely the right stance to be taking for people that are quite literally fleeing for their lives, that are running from a theocracy, a fascist regime. They are literally running for their lives. This isn't about, I want to come here because Tesco is great. This is about, it's not safe for me to live in that sort of country. I just think that it needs, what you've spoken about, is that the government haven't, and it might be because obviously they're still formulating it, because it's a big urgent thing. And again, that could speak to the sudden departure from Afghanistan, and how sadly these things weren't planned for in advance, so that there was some sort of mechanism kind of set up to do that. But they need to, I guess the challenge for the government, or the newly appointed ministers in the government, relevant departments, is that they need to find an answer of how to do this fairly, how to support those people right, and how to make sure that the measures and the money is there in local councils across the country, so that basically these people don't fall through the cracks, so that they don't end up being victims of basically it's a nice idea, but we've got no idea how to execute it.
Correct. But the weird thing is the government did actually do that for rough sleeping, They turned lots of things very quickly. So it can be done with a bit of drive and a bit of foresight. But I think it does come back to Ian's point earlier on, which is there wasn't any. Nobody believed this would happen, which may be naive. But regardless of what I think about the rights and wrongs of it, and I think it's very similar to residents of Hong Kong who were being told they were going to leave British control after the Chinese murdered hundreds of people and thousands of people in Tiananmen Square in 1989. You know, we owed a duty to them. We owe a duty to these people. We owe a duty to these. But for us as an authority, we have to deal with the practical implications of that. And that requires a detailed plan and long discussions. The discussions have been great with the MOD so far. And we just want to see what's coming out the Home Office.
Absolutely, Darren. I think you know, one of the things, isn't it, is it's interesting you touched on it there about the similarities and differences between, you know, local parties and political, you know, the political figures. Most of us, you know, even though our politics might be different, we all agree on what the right thing to do, or often agree on what the right thing to do is. The discussions come, or the difficulties or the snagging points then come down to the practicalities of how we're going to do it. You know, and I guess in terms of the interpreter families, there is a little, it is an easier arrangement because I guess these people are known to us. You know, they have their bona fides. We know them. They've worked for us. You know, and if I use sort of slightly divisive language in air quotes, we quote unquote know they're on our side, so are more than happy to accommodate and welcome and do the right thing by them. I guess the challenge comes, you know, to the point Simon touched on there. In 2 years' time, the person with no documentation who turns up in a rib on a beach in Dover, it's how do we validate that they are who they say they are, and that they are the people who are, you know, that are fleeing for the right reasons. I put that again in air quotes because I always have this trouble that, you know, I rather like France. So for me, if you're in France, you are no longer in peril. France is a pretty safe place.
Yeah, and the truth is, we don't know, and too often people in politics go, oh yes, well of course we know, when we don't. We simply don't know, and that has to be worked through, and that requires a discussion between all local authorities and the government as to how we're going to handle it. But as I said, 15,000 are in the country already. And they're being processed, to use that horrible bureaucratic term or verb. And so, you know, we need to know the plans relatively quickly because they ain't going to stay in hotels forever.
No, that's the thing. But as you said, there are examples of actually, despite its reputation for being unwieldy and impossible to enact change, even enact effective change very, very quickly. There are recent examples of government actually doing precisely that. So, you know, with the right will and with the right motivation and support, and hopefully the right help can be made available to make sure that we, as a country, we stand by our moral commitment to these people, and that we help them, and that they're able to feel safe again, and then, you know, reclaim their lives.
Yeah.
Even if they are thousands of miles from home, if they can at least, you know, do that here and be safe, and actually build a life where they're not having to look over their shoulder or worry about, you know, why has someone not come back from going out shopping or etc.
Correct. But that's something that we're going to have to look at over the next months and years.
Yeah, that's
and also what happens when the next one of these occurs. What do we do then? Is there another intervention that we will make that will fail or we'll be forced to pull out? And then what happens? The Vietnam comparison is an incredibly good one, because I remember growing up and watching the boat people come over.
Yeah.
And many of them, including in Portsmouth and in other parts of Southeast Hampshire in this region, were welcomed with open arms, and have been fantastic contributors to our country, as is the case in the US. So these things will continue to happen, and we've just got to plan ahead, really.
And on that bombshell, I think that's we did want to ask, actually, didn't we? You had the last question. We need to ask that.
Was there? Oh, okay, you tell me what your last question is then.
Yeah, it was really just that there's been some great media. There's been some great media stories about people of Portsmouth stepping up and really wanting to help. Do you get the impression that as a naval port city, we are overwhelmingly there's a feeling of welcome?
Yeah. And I think it's not just true here. I think it's true in other parts of the country as well. I mean, they see the same photos you mentioned earlier on, Ian, and they just go, Lord Almighty, we want to help these people. And that's why we encourage people to get in touch with the council. That's why we encourage people to get in touch with the Hive if they want to offer up donations or expressions of interest or potential rooms and everything else, because that will help us along the way. And the more people who can do that, the better. But it does show just how wonderfully warm this city is.
So that just in case anybody needs it, that would be hiveportsmouth, all as one word, .org.uk. Is their website. So if you look on there, you can find ways to contact them and offer your help and assistance.
Yep, no, that's great.
Perfect. Well, Darren, thank you ever so much, as always.
Thank you.
So you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And our guest has been?
I'm Darren Sanders.
And I've been Simon Sainsbury.